And welcome to Host Chat here, back to our kind of normal format as we still have some teams in the running here. Second round action, as you're pointing out there, Mr. Baker. JB, we've got some. I think it's surprising to a certain extent, although I think coming into these playoffs, you and I had a certain belief level that we might see three teams still alive at this point. Obviously, we would
Yeah.
see two in the East region because of the way the
hmm
quadrant was in the bottom right.
Yep.
But the
hmm
question was Frostburg, and could they get through Wittenberg and whoever came out of the Washington Jefferson game week one, which was W and
hmm
J. But that team was playing some really inspired football toward the end of the season. So if you don't mind, let's start there for a second to talk about the
Okay.
Frostburg State win over Washington Jefferson. It was a team. It was a game rather where it kind of was. They start level pegging, and then it seemed like Frostburg was doing this to them, even though there's an upward trajectory for Washington Jefferson throughout that game. Frostburg seemed to just keep exceeding them throughout the game and separating from
Yeah.
them to the big win.
Yeah, and every time it looked like the Presidents might crawl back into it, the Bobcats just turned around and scored. And it wasn't an easy feat for them. I mean, their quarterback Connor Cox struggled. He did throw, I think, at least two, maybe three interceptions in the game. But sort of the two-headed monster at running back really worked well for them. Their defense made some key plays, getting some key stops, getting some turnovers of their own to help their offense have short fields. So yeah, I mean, I think we're starting to see, Frank, is from a conference perspective that the NJAC from a East region perspective is probably rising to the top of our region. The PAC, which is just to our south, mostly Pennsylvania teams, maybe not as strong as originally thought, and I think we saw that with how easily later on in the second half the Bobcats kind of pulled away, and also pretty much how Mount Union didn't really have much trouble with Case Western intercepting them like five times in the first half or something crazy like that. So I think we're starting to see some of those conferences kind of make some statements, and I have a crazy statement of my own to make in a little while about the MAC. We'll see if I'm right or wrong a little later, but the Presidents put up a good fight for a little while, but Bobcats are really clicking on all levels right now. They've been playing great football for several weeks now.
Talking about the trajectory of that game, to just back that up, Frostburg State won every quarter in the box score. It was 10-7, and then 7-3 in the second quarter, 17-7 in the third quarter, 12-6 in the fourth quarter for the 46-23 final. They doubled them up at the end of the day, and you look at the entire box, and it's like, wow, if this Frostburg State team played this way against Wesley in the middle of the season where they lost in overtime, we probably would be talking
hmm
about an undefeated Frostburg State team, 388 to 323 in yardage, but defensively they just always had an answer. Connor Cox's three interceptions probably kept Washington and Jefferson in this game, although Alex Rouse had three
Yeah,
interceptions of his own. Gavin
sure
Labatt's
did.
146 rushing, he outrushed Connor Cox's passing yards by 6 yards in that game. And that's just something that
Mhm.
you don't necessarily think you'll see in a Frostburg box where they win 46-23. It's just one of those teams that when one end of it seems to be not 100%, they've got someone else there to pick it up for them. And congratulations, Frostburg State, you get to play Mount Union. Congratulations. I mean, this is that award that you want. But this is the award that the East Region team that would
Hey,
get to this point would normally get for the last, 10 years or so. So one of these
yeah.
teams from the East is going to get it, but they had to survive 2 rounds to get there with no other East
hmm
teams to fight against. And here you go. Let's give a little preview of this matchup coming up. Mount Union, as you said, handled Case. D'Angelo Fulford is still starting, even though there was a too deep that may have suggested otherwise that was mistakenly sent out there at one point in time. He is
hmm
still starting. They've got some great running back prowess out there, even if he weren't to start for any reason. We have no reason to believe he won't on Saturday, though. I will state that clearly here. But, it's been a Mount Union team that has not necessarily put teams away that you would think they would put away in the first half as much as
Yeah.
they have historically in this level of the playoffs. Is this a game that Frostburg can win, do you think?
If they can control, if they can avoid the amount of turnovers that they had against the Presidents, they have a shot. if Connor Cox throws 3 interceptions against the Raiders, you can pretty much guarantee that those will be turned into 21 points. The Raiders just have a knack for causing and creating turnovers and then scoring points either from a pick six like they had, I believe, against Case, to just in general. Anytime teams, and you see it, we've seen it for like 20 years now. So many teams go into Mount Union and they kind of self-destruct. So if the Bobcats can kind of get over that initial sort of fear factor, I think I have a friend who's a Mount Union fan who texted me, and he's saying it would be nice to play a good team. No disrespect to Case, but he's kind of saying that we're a great team, obviously, but we want more competition. And so, obviously with receivers like Hill and Ruth, the Bobcats secondary is going to have to be ready. Their pass rush is going to have to be ready to put some pressure on Fulford, because if it's not, it's going to be a long day.
Well, let's talk about the East Quadrant again. And we had a game that at the top part of the quadrant didn't look necessarily as appealing as the bottom half. But I got to say it, Husson gave them a challenge. And we had a little back and forth with what I would call a rabid Husson fan on Twitter at one point in the week, where they were saying, Ross, you don't say no, you have no chance. They were using Western New England as a common opponent. But I think what everybody was missing is that Delaware Valley's defense is the bend but don't break, and then we'll just take the ball away from you type of defense we've seen all season long. And I think that's kind of what played out here. They bent, but they did not break, and then they just piled on the yardage, especially in that second half, where the yardage ends up being 502 to 241 in Del Val's zone there, and it's 37-15 final. Del Val wins that game. Another 22-point game. We had a 23-point game. The other, what was the average this weekend? Something like almost 25 points?
Basically 25. Yeah, it was 24.75. So 25 points was the average margin of victory. So not really a whole bunch of exciting games. And this game wasn't that exciting either, mostly because the Husson offense really couldn't get anything going until the second half. And, they finally got John Smith some running lanes. They made one really big play on special teams, a 93-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. So honestly, I felt like the Eagles, from a defensive and special team standpoint, actually hung in there very well and were very competitive with Del Val. Just on offense, the Eagles really couldn't do anything about how strong the Del Val defense was, and that was really the ultimate difference in the game. I thought that the Del Val QB looked okay. He didn't play a great game. He did have some nice long throws, but for the most part, I do give Husson some credit. I think they showed up as well as they could have, and credit John Smith. I think he finishes his career as one of the top all-time rushers in Division III. He was the number one rusher this season. He was the first person to run over 100 yards against that Aggies defense all season, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. He had a touchdown in the game, so congrats on a great career for him. Maybe we'll see him in some type of pro aspect one way or another if he gets an opportunity to do so. But not in the most exciting game, but it was mostly just because of the Del Val defense really just shutting down the offense for most of it.
Here's one thing I'll say about what's going to happen to John Smith. He is getting attention from ballot holders, I guess is the way to say it, in the Glardy Trophy scenario. I saw one, I'm not going to name names, actually ask a question to somebody that attended the game, what'd you think about him? And so, it is garnering interest to a level that I didn't necessarily see coming. He gets 32 carries for 161 yards and a touchdown yesterday. That's after was it 163 on in the or 164?
164 at a 43 against Springfield, yeah.
So he averaged just over 5 yards a carry against Del Val. He is definitely getting attention. For the Jordan Wilcox fans out there, that probably hurts Jordan's chances of getting into the Final Four because, while they have to rank from 1 to 10 on the list of 30 at the end, of the list of 10 that we originally had 30, it's down to 10. The ballot holders will vote, 10 points, 9 points, 8 points, all the way down. I think they go all the way down to 10 and just rank them that way, if memory serves. However it is, though, there are only so many points to give out to players, and that hurts to have two running backs from New England in the Final Four ultimately. So John Smith
Right.
is going to garner a lot of interest there. Corey Brandon's 4 interceptions obviously didn't help matters yesterday, but I don't blame Brandon as much as I blame this tremendous Del Val defense. It's just been something special this season. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
We've highlighted it. Sean Miller with 8 tackles. Nick Wright, though, with an interception and 8 tackles. Nicholas Degatti with 11 tackles led the team. These are numbers that they're going to need against the team we're about to talk about in a second here. Let's just key in, though, on Del Val for a couple more seconds. All season long, and I think you're going to come to your kind of interesting point here. Del Val has seemed to own games. And granted, the MAC plays, I believe, 9 out of 10 games in conference. We were wondering coming into playoffs, is this a product, their season? Granted, they had to start out against Wesley and beat them pretty handily, although Wesley came back toward the end of that game. It looked like it was separation there. So it was closer at the end, but it just didn't feel like Wesley was really in that game for too much of it. But Del Val has had that special season. We've had 2 playoff games. Are you sold yet that the MAC is strong and that they are a strong team because of it? Or have they gotten a draw here in the playoffs that necessarily or hasn't necessarily prepared them for what's up next in round 3 or even round 4 if they were to get through round 3?
Well, I did ruffle some feathers on Twitter yesterday when I said that Brockport would be a huge favorite. Now, I probably overstated a little bit because I'm prone to hyperbole, but I do think that when you compare the resumes, sort of objectively, that a 12-0 Empire 8 champion who's beaten teams, maybe not as as prolific as in past years, but they took out Hobart, they beat Cortland, which ended up being a postseason eligible team that won the New York Bowl. They took on Alfred, who won an ECAC bowl game. And as I mentioned in our last week 11, it was an extra one, that the MAC went 1-3 last weekend. Del Val beat Western New England, but I mean they're a good team, but they're not a great team. I mean, Brockport defeated Wesley, who's a very good team, handily. And if it wasn't for that, that fumble that sort of, helped them get back into the game, I think Brockport would have won this going away. I mean, they did win it by 21 points. So that says a lot there. They beat Plymouth State 66-0, whereas, Del Val is only beating, other New England champion teams by, 3 touchdowns. So to me, it feels like this Brockport team is more battle-tested, that they've played a tougher schedule, and we'll see if that shows or not. I mean, home teams have typically won most of the time in this playoff. There was one road team, Frostburg State, that won, although many thought they were the favorite. So that wasn't really a surprise. But going into this one, I don't know. I think I like Brockport just based on the resume and the fact that the MAC really sort of fizzled out at the end of the season.
Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here. Let's talk about the Brockport-Wesley game in totality here before we look at that matchup. It's going to be one of those situations we look at here, and for those, I'm not sure what order we'll post them in, but we have a great interview with Jason Mangoni, who's the head coach of Brockport in our content. It may be before this, maybe after this. We'll be figuring that out as we get to our editing ultimately. But, Wesley starts out with 82 yards, a pass play at 1:38 into the game from Burroughs to Kemp to make it 7-0. And, that's one of those quick blows that you're like, wow, there's Wesley. Here we go again. They're coming out this time, offensively really strong, really fast, getting over that whole slow start mentality. But then 21 unanswered points for Brockport in the game. And it took 7, 15, and 7 plays in those drives to do it. But then Wesley, it looks like they're going to be down at halftime no matter what. And all of a sudden, it is bang, bang. Wesley gets a 12 or 11-yard run from Burroughs, and then a turnover on a failed flea flicker that became basically a sack fumble scenario. Ends up as an E.J. Lee 2-yard touchdown run to make it 21-21. I don't know what was said at halftime. We've heard that not much. The team kind of knew what they needed to do, but they come out and have Germanario score in a nice 10-play drive, and then About 13 seconds later, McDonald has a
Yeah.
15-yard interception return for a touchdown to take that two-possession lead. The final was 49-28, but JB, it was an adventure of a game. It's probably the best game of the batch out there all day long because of the ebbs and flows of it compared to kind of the, wow, this really isn't much of a matchup scenario in the other 7 games for most of it that we saw. Kind of take me through. I know you were paying close attention to this game, but, was Wesley just not clicking at points, did you feel, or did you feel that Brockport was just that strong of a team that right now they are playing maybe their best football now that Joe Germinario is back and seems injury-free?
Yeah, I think it's more of the latter. I mean, the amount of pressure that they put up front, it really seemed to fluster Burrows a bit. He made a few mistakes, which are kind of uncharacteristic. There was a few turnovers that helped, sort of get the ball rolling, so to speak. McDonald, the big guy, pick 6 touchdown, really set the momentum in a different direction in the second half. Wesley just looked a little. They looked a little overmatched at times. Their offensive line really struggled with the 3-3 stack front. Burrows was under pressure pretty much all game. Lee did have some good runs. I mean, they still blocked well. They opened up a few holes. And I think over time, the secondary kind of figured out what was going on with Kemp, and they were able to make some adjustments to kind of lock him down a little better after he was sprung for that long touchdown to open the game. There were a couple of times where he could have made catches that would have extended drives, but they were batted down or overthrown a little because of the pressure. So it did seem like some adjustments that really worked. For the Eagles in the second half.
The one thing I like about this Brockport team is that when somebody goes and has kind of a game comparatively, there always seems to be somebody there to just kind of pick it up from there. Joe Germinario is 322 yards with his 11 carries and 30 completions out of 38 attempts. That's great efficiency there, Joe. Unbelievable efficiency against a team like Wesley and 3 touchdowns. Yep. But that mainly result, honestly, of shorter type passes that may have got extended. They knew what Wesley's defense was, and so they didn't push their luck too often in that game, going too deep downfield. They tried to, do a certain level of dink and dunk in this game, taking what they could get and extending it. And that's a smart offensive plan right there. Because, look, 7-play drives, 10-play drives, etc. That's not what Brockport's necessarily used to this season in their scoring ability. They are kind of a big play offense from what we saw throughout this year. Yeah. And they end up winning the time of possession, 32-28 or some fraction therein.
Yeah, and some of those big plays did happen. I mean, Ortiz really, beat the secondary a few times. Made some great plays. And we'll talk to Coach Mangione about this, but they had some goal line wildcat formations that Wesley may or may not have been expecting. Tyree Brown, I believe, was the player who came in. I think at one point he literally high jumped over another Wesley defender. It was a pretty spectacular move on his part. So Brockport, it seems to be clicking on all levels, and I know that there's been sort of this knock. Well, the East Region hasn't had a Final Four team, or maybe they don't deserve a Final Four team. But everything that I've seen from the tail of the tape makes it look like Brockport is a legitimate Final Four team. And if they are able to, go down to Doylestown and beat Del Val, they should have as good as any East Region team's shot at playing the winner of the Mary Hardin Baylor St. Thomas game as there have been in a few years. So we'll see. Absolutely.
And one thing to point out, Tyree Brown, we were worried about Morrison's injury and whatnot, but Tyree Brown with 7 carries for 23 yards with 2 touchdowns. That Wildcat scenario you were kind of pointing out there, I think, is part of his acumen out there. Morrison only 11 attempts, 35 yards, 8 yards long.
He was injured in the game, so
yep.
Yeah, he had to come out with either a knee or a leg injury. So, and he had missed a game. I believe he didn't play against Alfred, or he sat out the St. Lawrence game. He was a little banged up. So he's like any running back. I mean, hey, it's 12 games into the season. He's been getting hit by linebackers since August. So it's understandable, but it'll be a very crucial part of the Eagles' offense if he can keep going. But Hollister has stepped in and played well for Brockport. So even if Morrison isn't ready, they've got other options in guys like Brown and Hollister.
Well, JB, here's the matchup. Delaware Valley is going to be hosting Brockport. There may have been a miscue on one of our brackets that we saw at D3Football.com initially that would suggest otherwise, but Del Val hosting Brockport.
It was announced today.
Yeah, and we knew that just based on regional rankings there that would be the case. Doylestown is going to be probably warmer than Brockport would have been on Saturday. Actually, maybe a nice day, maybe in the 50-degree range, which this time of year is pretty good.
Yeah.
So, this is a game that elements should not affect, and it's going to be straight up great defense against great defense and offenses that seem to click when they need to. I would say, honestly, that Brockport is a team that we looked at the offense of to start the season, and then we began to understand as they were shutting out, I think it was Hartwick and Buffalo State in back-to-back weeks, that, boy, this defense is something special. And I think they've actually surpassed the offense in that respect. I mean, they scored 2 touchdowns on defense in the second half yesterday. So, I mean, come on. So these two teams match up. In terms of teams they faced, we probably feel that they are more battle-tested than Del Val. Brockport is more battle-tested than Del Val, at this point. But
I think so.
Del Val is still a really great team. And so give me kind of, you started earlier, but let's finish the assessment. Where do you think this goes?
I do think this is going to be a defensive battle that will come down to a few big plays here and there. I think there will be some turnovers, and it'll be sort of incumbent upon the offense that benefits from those turnovers capitalizing on them. I don't think you're going to see a 45-42 type of shootout. I think it's going to be like a 21-17 or 28-21 type of ball game. But I do like Brockport chances. I know that the home teams have pretty much won most of the contests in the playoffs so far. But I think it's a little bit of a different story at this level. Basically the two best teams, at least in this bracket, can't say the region because Frostburg would say, hey guys, what about us? And they've been playing about as good football as these other two teams have. But it's basically kind of a championship game. Likely the winner of this will end up as the ECAC Lambert Cup champion, given to the best team from the East region. To be honest, while I do think Frostburg can beat Mount Union, the chances are pretty slim. Mount Union rarely loses. It usually takes some kind of crazy turn of events, and with the way Fulford's playing, where the defense is playing, it's going to be a tough task for the Bobcats. But I think as far as any team that could go out to Alliance and beat them, they have just as good a chance as anybody else.
Let's talk about Wesley. Where do they go from here, do you think? They lose a lot of senior leadership, especially on defense. This was not a team that felt comfortable at all times on offense, but Burroughs did a great job when he needed to get that team rallied. And again, they got to 21-21 by halftime and then end up at a 35-21 scenario, and it just was too much of a scenario to come back from at that point because of the team they were facing. Give me your feel on where Wesley goes from here, because obviously they're a little bit of a dynasty in the formerly South, now East. They have as the Gagliardi Trophy candidate.
Yep, they have 13 NCAA playoff appearances. They've won the NJAC a few years in a row now. But Brockport was the first East Region team to knock them out of the playoffs in that 13 season run. So I think it does feel like maybe the rest of the pack is kind of catching up to them a little bit. And I think, kind of like what you'll hear in our conversation with Coach Mangione, it's going to come down to recruiting. And Coach Strauss has always been a great recruiter. He is going to lose some senior leadership on defense. He's going to lose Matt Gano, one of the better offensive linemen in the East region. But both Burroughs and E.J. Lee are still pretty young guys. They've got a lot of young talent in sort of the specialist positions. So it'll just be a matter, I think, of them reloading, maybe finding another E.J. Lee out there or other players who can come in and start to perform right away. They'll still be a favorite to reclaim the NJAC crown most likely, but maybe not, depending on how far Frostburg goes and who they have on that team next season. We'll see.
Okiki is a senior. He'll probably graduate off here at this point. And Kemp is a junior. The guy that got the 80-plus yard touchdown to begin the game and has very good speed and hands, obviously, comes back. So the crux, I think, on their specialists for their offense do come back. And I think the biggest thing that Coach Trask does is he helps build the experience level and parlays it into success ultimately. So I feel like the defense in Wesley is something that retools. The offense is going to be the question mark, but as the experience builds, this is probably one of my early favorites coming into 2018 right now. I think this team does come back and probably finish the work that they didn't finish this year. So the rest of the East region needs to be well aware and awake, and the NJAC is probably going to have a really good race between Frostburg and Wesley, although Salisbury will always be there to say, hey, what about us? They're going to have to play them at the end of the season as well, and we'll see what happens with that. Final thoughts, parting thoughts as we head into the week here as prep starts for, I think I said week 12 earlier. Technically, this is week 13, 2 weeks into the playoffs that we're reviewing. But week 14 coming up next. It's the quarterfinals. But what are your takeaways for this show, at least? And then we'll come back. We didn't do predictions last week officially, but we'll probably have them coming up later in the week. Well, yeah, I guess I have to.
Hit, so we tweeted that out. So. And unfortunately didn't get any hate mail directly, but there's always another week for that. But you kind of look at the Elite Eight, on sort of the north/west side of things. I mean, Oshkosh, Wartburg, pretty standard fare there. I mean, Wartburg really beat up Trying more than I thought that they would, and I think Mount Union Frostburg has a chance to be a really great game if the Bobcats can hang on to the ball. Mary Hardin Baylor against the Tommies, that should be a good one too. That'll be another probably low scoring, more defensive type of game, just like Del Val versus Brockport. So it's at the end of the day, it's great that we have 3 of the 8 sort of quarterfinalists from the East region. I think it's speaks well to the quality of football that we've seen so far this year. My biggest question, from the Del Val Brockport perspective is, does the fact that the MAC seems to have kind of faded down the stretch give Brockport an advantage, or is really the home court going to help the Aggies and that defense, which can cause a lot of havoc? Can they get to go Joe Germanario or not? But this is it. We're getting down to the close to the Final Four, so it's exciting, and we'll see how it goes.
And I think I said it in the Coach Mangoni interview, but I'm going to try to get down to the Del Val game. Obviously, I'd love to go to Frostburg, Mount Union, but that's going to be a tougher one. Can't be 2 places at once, and we don't stack these games in a way that it would even be possible if they played, let's say, down the street from each other. They were going to be right on top of each other at noontime Eastern. So we'll have coverage throughout the week. Coach Mangoni coming up at some point, if we haven't already dropped that interview, and also a Frostburg player interview, and maybe more than that. So come back and check us out throughout this week. But this is exciting. The games themselves may not have been to a lot of people, although I think Brockport Wesley provided the best of the batch in that respect across the country.
We had to go there to get here, and this is really what it's all about, is these quarterfinal Elite Eight games. Now we're down to the top 8 teams in the tournament, and I know I saw some traffic between Pat Coleman and some WIAC, either student athlete or fan, saying that what's the deal? Like, middle of the WIAC could beat half the teams in the East region type of thing. Well, obviously the playoffs aren't built that way, and honestly, my response is, well, a lot of the WIAC schools shouldn't even be in Division III anyway, but that's a topic for a different story, different day. And
okay, here comes the hate mail, ladies and gentlemen. It's coming right now.
But the tournament is set up as it is. There's access for conference championship. It makes the regular season relevant, and it gives us. I mean, these are all great matchups. I don't think any in the preseason, if you told me that Mary Hardin Baylor and St. Thomas were going to play for a Final Four spot, I'd be like, yeah, that sounds awesome. What a great matchup. Or Del Val versus Brockport for a chance to go to the Final Four. Yeah, that's a great matchup. We've been waiting for this all season long to have these kind of marquee matchups, and here they are, and it's going to be great when they happen on Saturday.
in Frostburg Mount Union, which may not have looked as strong as we would think right now. About 2 weeks ago, when we were before we even started these playoffs, or 3 weeks ago, for instance, it suddenly looks like a really appetizing or appealing matchup that we obviously know there's a favorite in this game. But hey, I think this team is better than Case, and I think it's better than Washington and Lee, so it's going to provide the best matchup out of the three so far for Mount Union. So. And then the upper left bracket is what? Oshkosh, Wartburg, and Wartburg looked like an unbeatable force yesterday. So we could see some interesting turnover going on here. Oshkosh and Mary Hardin-Vale are the returners from the Stag Bowl last year, are still alive, but they've got 2 tough games to play before they can have a rematch in Salem if it comes down to that ultimately. So we'll see where this goes.
Yeah.
JB, we'll talk to you later, and folks, we'll talk to you all later as well. Thanks for joining us.